I'm a big fan of Canadian Prepper's channel, but recently he said something so offensive to me that I need to make a reaction video to it. Hey everybody, this is Praxis. Recently, Canadian Prepper released a couple of videos where he issued a critique, and it seemed like it might apply to me reasonably well, and it got me thinking about this question, and I wanted to make a video about it because I don't think that I agree with Canadian Prepper. Now, I've been a fan of his channel for a while, and you know, there's always daylight between him and I on things. I think he does great analysis of different world events, and his general thoughts on pretty much everything related to prepping, I think is sensible, and you know, a lot of it resonates with me. But again, you know, sometimes there's daylight between us. Oftentimes it'll just be in terms of his certainty about various timelines, where I tend to be a lot more uncertain about things. He tends to at least present to some degree that there's a little bit more certainty there. But you know, generally I think I love his channel. I always check out all of his videos. But again, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything he says. And in this particular instance, I think I tend to disagree with his perspective on something. Now, what did he say that I'm disagreeing with? Well, he said recently that he feels that there are a lot of essentially like vanilla prepping channels, like Prepping Channels Light, where they're afraid to really talk about the idea that we are prepping for the end of the world as we know it, that are like kind of too afraid to really say what we're really doing. And I think my channel could be considered to fall into that category, because while I will occasionally do videos about big events, in fact, you know, recently I did something from my fallout shelter. I was recording a video in my fallout shelter about medications that you can take if you're exposed to radioactive fallout material. So I'll occasionally do videos like that, but the vast majority of what I do here on my channel is kind of DIY stuff, you know, kitchen-related stuff, pantry stuff, building stuff. I'm here in my beautiful greenhouse. It is all watered by gray water. You know, I'll do videos about that kind of stuff and talking about kind of the positives of living this kind of lifestyle, like with a pantry that you might have in your house. I very rarely, if ever, I don't know if I've really ever said it, said that, you know, the reason I have a pantry is I don't want to starve to death during the apocalypse, and you know, I want to have years and years and years worth of food in my pantry. The reason that I usually present that I have a pantry, despite the fact that what I just said is kind of on my radar, that is part of my thinking, but I don't talk about that. What I usually say are the reasons to have a pantry is that you can buy food in bulk, so you save money, and you can avoid like the emergency of like you're baking muffins and you run out of sugar, so you got to like go all the way to the grocery store to get sugar. Those aren't the only reasons that I have a pantry. There are a lot of motivations that I have for doing a lot of the things that I do that I don't openly really say here on my channel. And maybe that's a bad thing, and that's kind of what Canadian Prepper was suggesting, is that's a bad thing, that people like myself tend to kind of keep it vanilla. There's a term that Canadian Prepper uses a lot, and he introduced me to this term. It's a great term. It's called the Overton window. And what the Overton window means, if you're not familiar with it, is it means essentially what's acceptable to talk about in a given society at a given moment in time. And the Overton window is always moving. It's not like one fixed thing. COVID is one of my favorite examples to go to, as a event that we kind of saw play out in real time in our lives, and we can kind of critique it at this point. The Overton window was different at different points during COVID. Like at the beginning of COVID, you were crazy, and outside of the Overton window, if you suggested that this virus, which emerged in Wuhan province, right near the virology lab in Wuhan province, might have come from the virology lab. You were crazy and outside of the Overton window if you said that. Since then, the Overton window has moved, and now I think, if my math is right, I think now you're crazy if you don't believe that. Other things during COVID, like with the vaccines, you were crazy if you didn't think they'd be 100% effective, and now that's common knowledge. So the Overton window moves in terms of what is acceptable to say. And I try to stay within that on my channel pretty much all the time. So I don't oftentimes reveal a lot of the motivations for me doing things. I'll oftentimes talk about what I'm doing, but I will talk about them in terms of the pros being other things. Here's a good example of that in general. This is my book I just recently released. If you want to get your own copy, I always put links down in the description. It's called the Prepper's Cheat Book, and it's full, I made it for myself, it's full of all the kind of stuff that as a prepper you kind of tend to forget, like specific information that at the right time you need it, but nobody's going to remember all this kind of stuff. But this is a really eclectic book. Some might call it schizophrenic and scatterbrained in the way that it presents stuff. Like the first section here is about water. And it's all about different ways of purifying water. That's pretty vanilla. I mean, that's the kind of thing like you might get like a boil water order in your town, and you can't use your water, you know, because there's contamination. So that's something that comes up all the time. You don't have to like be thinking about like fringe, like aliens invading by airdropping bird flu infected clown zombies to want to know how to treat water. Right after that, we've got some wild plants, you know, for foraging and eating wild plants. That's just a hobby that people have. But during an emergency situation, I've got my pantry. I've got beans and rice and different grains and things like that. But fresh vegetables are not something that it's easy to really store a lot of. You can freeze them, but you only have so much freezer space. So wild edible plants are something that it's a hobby, and it can enrich your hikes. You know, you're walking through the woods and you see all these familiar plants. You can kind of nibble on them as you're going, and it can enrich your life now. And that's the way I always kind of push it in my channel, is like that kind of enrichment. But during an emergency event, it would be a way of getting a lot of this fresh vegetables and fruits into your diet that aren't necessarily in your pantry. But I don't tend to push that kind of stuff. And then it gets super vanilla. I've got a whole section about the kitchen, and this is honestly the section I use the most. It's got just baking timetables. I was doing shrimp last night, and I needed to go through, and you know, I just use this for like how many minutes and what temperature to, you know, for cooking shrimp, or you know, for corn on the cob or whatever. I'm going to pop it in the oven. You know, so these are the kind of things, like this isn't the sort of stuff that gives people nightmares at night. It's like, oh, like I don't remember how to, like, you know, properly cook frog. I got how to cook frog in here. Let's go to something a little bit more vanilla. Carrots. It's like, you know, you're not going to like wake up at like a cold sweat at night because it's like, I'm going to forget how to cook sliced carrots, like what temperature to run them at. You know, so this book, it's like full of a lot of vanilla stuff. I got some campcraft stuff in here, orienteering stuff in here. The majority of this book is all like kind of vanilla stuff, but then you kind of get back towards the end, and we've got measuring nuclear radiation from fallout, and there's all sorts of like dosage tables, and these are really one of the big things that caused me to want to make this book for myself. And then I've got things on like, you know, putting together a fallout shelter in here. So like even this book is kind of schizophrenic in terms of, it's like, you know, on one page you're baking carrots, and then another one you're building a fallout shelter. But all the time on my channel, I'm always kind of pushing that kind of vanilla reasoning for things. And is Canadian Prepper right that that is a mistake, to always kind of be pushing those kind of vanilla reasons? And there is a downside that I can perceive for that. There is a downside of me doing this. There are upsides as well. I'm going to talk about the upsides in a moment, but I'll talk about, and I will acknowledge the downside first. The downside of me talking about things in vanilla terms all the time is that, well, here's another example from COVID. When COVID happened, it was not a shock to my system at all, or my family system. And a lot of other people can't say that. A lot of other people apparently suffered severe psychological trauma of the change of their world. You know, one day things were this way, the next day things were like turned on their head. That was traumatizing for people. Why was it not traumatizing for my family? We're just cut from stronger cloth? No, it's because we took the trauma and we spread it out over vast spans of time, instead of it being overnight, where I think, what was it, like March or April, when like the government here in the United States officially announced this is a pandemic and, you know, it's going to be a thing. I think it was back in December of the previous year that I started doing things in terms of kind of changing my behavior. And so that was like months and months between when I kind of started engaging in modified behavior and, you know, when the rest of society kind of caught up. But of course, you know, we found out later that COVID wasn't as terrifying as people were concerned that it might have been. You know, certainly people died from it, but it was not the horrifying high death toll pandemic disease that a lot of preppers anyway had been concerned about. But at the beginning, we really didn't know. You know, China was welding people into their homes. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. But my family had months and months of that kind of transition period because we were preparing for it early. And even prior to that, for years, for decades, I'd been accumulating respirators and other things like that. So the trauma, the shock was spread out over years and years, whereas other people like have minutes, where it was all compressed into that kind of compressed moment when things flipped. World War III is something that we're looking at right now. People talk about, well, will World War III happen? In my perspective, it's already begun, and it began a while ago. I think the most sensible moment to kind of delineate the beginning of World War III, and really to break wars up into, this is this war, and this is that war, and this is this war. It's generally a very artificial way of looking at things. Really, conflicts just kind of ebb and flow through time. They heat up and they cool down. And if you were going to consider kind of a heating up moment for World War III, I would suggest it was probably the invasion of Crimea by the Russians. Now, that was preceded by NATO kind of dealing with Ukraine in ways that were counter to agreements that they had had with Russia prior. So I guess politically, you could suggest that the beginning of it started well prior to that. But in terms of kinetic force being applied, I think the invasion of Crimea is kind of the demarcation point of the beginning of what people will later on refer to as World War III. So for me, World War III has already happened. We're living within it, and we are preparing for gradual escalation, going one rung of the ladder to the next. For the vast majority of people, World War III is a hypothetical thing that will never happen, and someday when it does, that's going to be very traumatizing for people, because it will be delivered by the media as a black and white, day and night kind of thing, where yesterday there was no World War III, and then because it's going to be because Russia did something. I mean, if here in the West, that's what they'll say. Because Russia did this thing, now it's World War III. Now it's game on. And that's going to be a shock to people's system, because they were not preparing for it over vast stretches of time. So getting back to why I think the way that I present information on my channel might be problematic, it is because I'm not preparing people for that, at least not directly. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But speaking about things not in terms of World War III and not about terms of imminent pandemic, when those events happen, people have not been desensitized to thinking about these things, about pondering these things. And because people are not desensitized to it, it's a real shock to their system. So that, I acknowledge, is a downside of doing things the way that I do them. But the upside of doing things the way that I do them is that I feel it makes it more likely for people to actually start taking steps. When I talk about filling up your pantry because it's going to save you money and make it more convenient for you, you're not going to run out of things, it's easy for people to digest that. And a lot of people that wouldn't even consider setting up a pantry if the host, in my position, was saying you need to set up a pantry because in 2027 there's going to be a massive food shortage, and you're going to starve to death and your family's going to starve to death if you don't set up a pantry. That might be true. That might be what happens. And as a prepper, as someone that thinks about these things, I'm open to that actually being a plausible possibility. That in 2027, let's say February 14th, is that Valentine's Day? I think it's Valentine's Day. Well, yeah, okay. Valentine's Day of 2027, that happens. Hopefully this doesn't turn into like a Simpsons episode and I was like dead on, spot on right about it. It's fairly unlikely that a lot of people who are not already into prepping and preparedness are going to pay that any heed, and they're probably not going to set up a pantry. But if you sell it on, you're saving money and it's convenient, people may start setting up a pantry. And once they kind of get a little taste of that, where they're realizing that they're able to save money and it saves them a couple times, they may start increasing their pantry and, making it more and more sufficient for dealing with longer term emergencies. So it's kind of a way of getting people to prepare for things that they wouldn't otherwise prepare for anyway. Because if there is that Valentine's Day 2027 event, if people have set up a pantry ahead of time because they were saving money and because they didn't want to run out of sugar while they're making muffins, they're going to be in a better position. But I would go even a step further, where I said that I'm not preparing people, at least not directly, for the psychological impact of things like that. I do believe there's an indirect benefit, and I think that is not worth ignoring. And the indirect benefit is that I think people are more likely to be prepared for, mentally prepared for, and more accepting of situations that they happen to already be ready for or that otherwise don't negatively impact them. Climate change, I think, is a good example of this. Venus having runaway climate change based on the mixture of gases in the environment was completely non-controversial. The idea that the gases in a system on a planet can influence that planet's climate. Nobody really had any kind of problem with that when it was on Venus. And I think the reason for that is that there's no implications for us that the mixture of gases in Venus's atmosphere are responsible for the incredible temperature that we see on Venus. We can accept that just solely on the merits of the academics and the science, and there's no ramifications for us to, based on that. There's no responsibility that, like, if we accept that Venus has its present climate based on the mixture of gases in the atmosphere, that doesn't mean that I can't mow my lawn this afternoon, or I can't take a trip to the Caribbean or something like that. It has absolutely no influence on me. And when people are not influenced at all by something, here think politicians and money in politics, when people are not influenced by things, they are much more clear-headed in terms of evaluating those things. And when they are influenced by those things, again, think money in politics and politicians, the way that they get their funding for their re-election campaigns and whatnot. When people are impacted by things, they think much less critically about them. And I think the same is true with emergency situations. If you can get people to a point where they are prepared for something, where they're already ready for that thing to happen, I think people have a tendency psychologically of being more amenable to understanding that that thing could happen. And that is why I think when it comes to dramatic, disastrous events, we as humans tend to be open to the idea that that kind of thing could happen to them over there, or to them in a different time period in the past, because it doesn't influence us here and now. People are much more open to accepting things if those things being accepted don't require anything of that person. So if you have somebody who already has a pantry, and they already do their own gardening, and they already have evacuation plans for getting out of their house because they listen to these kind of vanilla prepping channels, and these vanilla prepping channels got them hooked on some of these things. If you have someone that's like that, and they already do a lot of these things, I think that person is much more clear-headed in thinking about the possibility of the big disasters happening that would require those types of things from them if they're already doing them, and no more is required of them for that. I think it's important to present these ideas by an actual person, because one other thing that Canadian Prepper referenced in his video is that all this information is freely available online. You can just go on ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or something like that and just say, tell me what I need to do to prepare for X, Y, or Z, one of these vanilla kind of events, and it'll tell you exactly what to do. So what's the point of people like myself making these kind of videos? Well, I think another benefit is just seeing another human being doing these things. Because, it's one thing to have the information to do something, but humans are social animals, and, in a lot of situations, we don't like really sticking our neck out and being particularly different. If there's not somebody else already doing something, a lot of times people are kind of nervous about doing that themselves. You see other people that normalize the idea of prepping and having a pantry and having a greenhouse watered by gray water and doing gardening and having an evacuation plan. If you see other people that just seem normal, and I try to present myself as normal, even though I always got these weird-ass t-shirts on. Oh, this is really appropriate. It says, hang on, let me overthink this. And this video has been like an hour long. When you see kind of people that feel normal doing something, it normalizes it for you, and I think it makes it seem more acceptable. So I think it is really important to have people like that out there. It's not where somebody that's never even heard of prepping is going to independently just go off and do a search and feel comfortable doing all these things when none of their friends or family do any of that. I think it helps a lot to see normal people doing these types of things to get people's foot in the door, and then the more you get prepared for those more extreme events, the more you're going to be open to those potentially being possible, because it's not as terrifying to you anymore once you've prepared for it a little bit. And then, I like to think of us as being the gateway drug to the more advanced prepping content. So that's it. I hope you found this video useful. I don't mean to take a big dump on Canadian Prepper or his channel or his views. I think it was a legitimate view, and it made me think. I ultimately end up disagreeing with the absolute lack of utility of channels, but it's something worth mentioning and thinking about, because I oftentimes play things pretty close to the chest, to be honest. Like my plan to move to the Southern Hemisphere potentially, I'm doing that for a number of reasons that I've mentioned on this channel, but I'm also doing it for a number of reasons that I haven't and I won't mention on this channel. And just so you don't get your imagination going too far, it's not because I'm on the run from the law or anything like that. And I need to evacuate the country quickly. There's other reasons that I don't feel comfortable talking about I'm making it weird by not getting into it. But yeah, I mean, this is the way I do my channel. I try to keep it sane, sensible, and vanilla. And hopefully channels like mine are the first stepping stone of people on their way towards a deeper and deeper sense of self-reliance and independence. Because the less you rely on things, the less is at stake in not going along with stuff. I think the more it allows human beings to be ethical, moral, logical, sensible, intelligent creatures. When we get scared and we're dependent on something, we're not going to be nearly as critical of that something as, sometimes I think is merited by that something. That's pretty darn vague, but that's the way I like to do it here on my channel. That's it. Hope you found this video useful, and thanks for watching. Hey YouTube preppers, if you enjoyed this video, here's another that I think you might like. But before you click on it, I wanted to take a moment to thank all the people you see on the right-hand side of your screen. They help to support all the work that I do here over at patreon.com. If you'd like to join them and get your name added to the list, the link's below.